All
Problem is,
right.
once you share a screen, all your controls get messed around and thrown in different places.
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
like
so
it's terrible.
is the Parmenides image up again and legible, or does it need to be?
All good, all good.
All good.
All right. Whew. All right. What? So I promised a summary, which is probably misleading. But what I'm going to try to do is try to make some of what one might call the logical or the ontological foundations of what we've been reading in Aristotle, maybe a little clearer, maybe a little easier. And one thing that we discovered in the course of this year is that it was very helpful for understanding some of Aristotle's arguments to read them against the background of Parmenides and the Parmenidean challenge, which, you know, for many initiates Western philosophy as a specific enterprise. And so, so I thought we'd take a look at some of these, some of the consequences of thinking being the way all of us basically think being, and that Parmenides stated in philosophical and categorically clear form and showed the consequences. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through some of the consequences of this idea, which I think is natural to all of us, that namely what is, or being is, and non-being is not. Just, I realize that that's very, that might seem vague, but I think the idea behind it has become fairly clear to everybody in the group. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down the page here and look at some of the implications. And the major theses are put in boxes. And you'll see we go from no difference to no change, no falsity, no truth.
I know.
Okay, so differences we can think of, you know, there's no, so what I'm driving at is this. The question with respect to difference and change, there are real world consequences for how we are allowed to conceptualize things based on the prior premise that being is. So we got real world ones, but what's most important to me, and I think is most important to the Greeks, is this. It doesn't just have real world consequences about what things can be, but it has consequences for the very theory that enunciates the claim about being. Oh, I wanted to make one more diagram, but I'm not going to be able to. So what I'm trying to put my finger on is that any theory of being will be about all things. One of those things will be the thinker who thinks this theory of being. And so the thinker and the thinker's thought about being will be inside the domain, will belong as a member to the domain of all things. And if your theory of being makes a theory of being impossible, then you have not a theory of being at all. You have a theory of something else, or you have a theory of nothing. So getting at being requires us thinking about being. If our theory of being prevents that thought from being about anything, then we're actually not thinking about being, but we're just using words that have no reference and no, they're not anchored in what we're trying to talk about. Okay, so Greek philosophy, I think one of the things that makes Greek philosophy so radical is that, and why they turn to studies of words, the study of logoi, the study of what we might call concepts or definitions, is is precisely because Plato and Aristotle especially recognize that the encompassing accounts that were being offered by their predecessors all had a very unfortunate conclusion, or a very unfortunate implication. None of their theories about being could be true. And so, since they could not be true, they were either meaningless or simply false. And so when we think being, when we think any all-encompassing concept like being or unity, for instance, or existence, that concept that we study must include the study of it. And if it cannot, then the study of it isn't really happening. It's an illusion. So the Greeks are not, or the Greek philosophers that we're studying don't just go out and start describing red things and hard things and hot things and then try to find something common. Because the theory that is common to hot things and red things and I don't know, sweet things, if your understanding of being comes from that, then your understanding itself is neither sweet nor colored nor hot or cold, and therefore is excluded from that ontology. And this happens a lot in philosophy. It happens all the time today in so-called naturalistic discourse. The possibility of the theory is not accounted for in the theory of natural things or in the theory of the physics that has an object domain. And so one thing that we can learn is that the Greeks, part of the difficulty of the Greek thought is that it is so all-encompassing that the thought of being contains in itself reference to that thinking, that philosopher's thinking being. And that has to belong to that domain, and that domain has to be have the structure sophisticated enough to account for this inclusion of the thought of being in the totality of being. All right. So I'm just going to stop for a second, and if anybody has any remarks, I'm going to let Peter or Bo call. Peter, I'm going to ask you, I can't see anybody, so I can't see if any hands are raised. And so if people raise hands, if Peter wouldn't mind calling on them.
Okay, nobody's raised their hand. So basically, that means this is getting at the self-referentiality of beings, that any theory of being has to be able to include any thought of being, including the being that's in the theory of being.
Exactly.
And the Parmenidean theory somehow, because it bifurcates being and non-being, just doesn't allow that.
Right. And you know, and that's, thank you. That's very well stated. And it gets me to another point here. Once we understand this, right, we will no longer be content with the when people ask you, you know, what is being, or you ask somebody what's being, and they say, well, it's just it's what's there, right? What's there. It's either, you know, being is just being, and then we've got the Parmenidean all-encompassing being is, or we have this very empty idea, you know, what is being there?
Determinate existence, Dasein.
Yeah, well, yeah, so yeah, but exactly. So we end up getting all these synonyms that just refer to one another, and we don't get any cash value. What is to be there? What is just to be? Right. And and I think, first of all, I think that Parmenides captures our basic sense that being just is, it's just there. And once we work through, what the consequences of that are, we will come to the conclusion that that is not a thought of being at all. And that being must be much more internally linked to not being. Must be much, there won't be this utter exclusion. And then that gets hard to think, right? That gets hard, how can being and non-being be interlinked instead of excluding one another? And I'm not going to pursue that, but I mean, one of the things that we can see in Plato and Aristotle is precisely the concern with conceptualizing things such that being and non-being are not excluded from one another. And that gives their elaborations, their deliberations, their dialectical quality, because being and non-being are being thought together, not as identical, but as together in very specific ways at different levels of this ontological hierarchy, substance and accidents, for instance.
We have a hand up.
Oh, beautiful.
Philippe.
Hey, Michael. So
You scared me for a second.
As Hegel in the introduction, that subject and object cannot be conceived independent of each other, and there's actually there's no place, there's no separate place to take a stance.
Yes.
And by splitting being and non-being, to use Peter's terms, Parmenides is positing that there's a separate place from which you can take a stance.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a very nice metaphor. And just in case it's not clear to everybody, Philip, do you mind unpacking? How's the whole question of a stance come in here?
So, for me at least, if the observer is just not, if he's discussing non-being from inside being, if you will, then he's already said that non-being is part of being.
Right.
But if he says that, okay, I use my language stance, where I can discuss both being and non-being, and conceptualize somehow separate from myself, then where is he?
Yep.
You'll have to lower your own hand, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I like that point because it gets at the Schmittian rejection of representation, right? There's the object out there, and then there's me thinking it in here, and that's just the same kind of disjunction that Parmenides gives us between being is and being is not. And once that disjunction happens, you either fall epistemologically into, you must fall into skepticism, there is no choice, right? Or this distinction can't be, an exclusive one. There must be some overlap between the subject and object, or between thought and being. And so one of the things, obviously, I've been doing a lot in this seminar is just trying to give a lot of pointers to how it is inescapable that there is an overlap between being and non-being, or between subject and object, or between representation and represented. And once we recognize that there's no escape from acknowledging this overlap, now the task is to think it and not run away from it, because it it doesn't jibe with common sense or something. So we are involved in thinking that overlap. All right. So I can't see if there's any more.
Our next commentator is Tyler Whitson.
Oh, excellent. Oh, nicely done, Peter. It's like a game show.
Yeah, I was just going to make a short comment on being there, or I would say
Oh, yeah.
something like presence. But for something to be there, you already say there's something different than being.
Why?
Because there cannot be what it is to be there cannot be what it is to simply be.
Why
It had to be
not?
non-equivalent.
Okay.
Because for something to be there, right, we had to have what being is and what there is.
Okay.
So for something to be there, we already have two things, and each is not being the other thing.
Right.
And this becomes a problem when we want to say anything about either being or when we want to say something is not being, because of course, to talk about something not being, we have to say that it is something that is not being.
Exactly.
I'm still not sure that there's a difference between the way you stated it. There was obviously you used the concept of there and being, but I'm not sure being requires a there. So I'm not sure that that's.
I don't think being requires a there, but one conception, one thing people will say about being, that it's being there. That's just what it is. Well, that's two things already.
Oh, if you're saying, yeah, that's spatiotemporal existence kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And then you run into the, the problem that if being there is being spatial, then where is space? Because in order for something to be, it's got to be somewhere. And now we require it to be in space, but is space in space?
No, space is relational. We'll take Leibniz's way out.
Well, yeah, but then if it's relational, then it's dependent on the things. But we just said that the things require space for their existence, and now space requires the things for its existence. And now we're either in, we've got an interesting problem. I mean, one way to think about it, of course, is, space requires itself. And that's just the ontological argument. And so space is God. I mean, you can go there, and they went there in the 17th century, but it pissed the Christians off, and it pissed the scientists off. And so they gave up on it pretty quickly. But anything that requires itself is, anything that it requires itself and is, well, must always have been, because in order for it to come to be, it already was. And that's just that's a fancy way of saying that it's a necessary existence. So.
Philip's raising his hand.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, as I listened to Tyler, and I'm thinking, Tyler, is what you're saying, is it an argument about the relation between universals and particulars, one, and two, and Michael, we began Parmenides with the part whole distinction.
Yeah.
Is this is the diagram, is what you're showing us is it the part whole distinction the same?
I wasn't thinking about the part whole distinction when I wrote this, but it can probably be translated into those kind of terms. But we'll see when I go through it. But I'm going to let Tyler answer his part of the question.
Yeah, I think if you split things into universal and particular, you've gone beyond just being. So anything that is different from being is it requires accounting for how being is one, everything is one.
Uh-huh.
And yet there are many different kinds of being somehow, or different relations between things. So with universal in particular, you're already beyond the the notion that being simply is and is one.
Hmm.
So question, I mean, certainly, Hegel captures that idea because there's this very beginning, there's just pure being, which is
Mhm.
pretty much incomprehensible or something. Then you get to pure determinacy, which requires, and then you can build up from that. So he just, distinguishes Sein and Dasein. But I don't know if Aristotle makes that distinction or not. So I don't want to be reading that back into Aristotle.
Right. I mean, that's a good point. We are talking about being just wrapping our heads around this claim that on one hand it's common sense, and on the other hand it's like almost you can't get your arms around it. Being is and non-being is not. I don't know. Before I launch into this, Tyler, did you want to pick up Peter's point?
Yeah, I would have to dig around in Aristotle to answer whether or not Aristotle makes the exact same point. But I think he does in his accounting for the possibility of change, make that point somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Not quite in the same way Hegel does, but I think it's in there.
I'm not sure. I mean, because in the change, it's like, roughly speaking, it's a change of properties of an underlying subject.
Yeah.
And already you have distinction between this underlying subject, whatever the hell that is, and the properties of the lack and the non-lack thing. So those are already, you're well on your way to lots of things beyond just pure being when we talk about change.
Right. That's kind of the point, though. Change
The point I was
requires.
making was that at least Hegel acknowledges pure being about which you can't even say anything. We haven't even got to determinacy. You can't have properties and things without determinacy, at least.
Oh
Right.
no, I'm saying that Parmenides, Aristotle's response to Parmenides, has to do with the impossibility of Parmenides' account of pure being.
Correct. I understand that.
Okay.
I was just trying to say that some other things you're talking about seem to attribute to Aristotle in his response more things that I hadn't seen in him yet.
All right, so let's get to Aristotle. Well, the long and slow way, which is my forte. All right, so what did I even do this for, right? I want to show that the way we think about being is necessarily tied to how we think about thought and speech, and how we think about thought and speech is necessarily tied to how we think being, and that they're interrelated, and you can't have one without the other. So so what I'm going to do is this is the Parmenides page, and then I've got another page that's going to be some Heraclitus, some Protagoras, and some Anaxagoras, and we're going to see that with their remarkable different ways of conceptualizing being, as mixture or as flux, or just as being is, that they all have very, very similar consequences for speech, namely either everything's false or nothing can be false. And so their theories are impossible. And that's, I think, where the real Platonic, Aristotelian, the new beginning of philosophy, what Socrates in the Phaedo calls the turn to the logoi, right? We're going to find what things are by turning to logoi, accounts, definitions, not to what the definitions are supposedly about. Okay, yeah, so I could, let's just get into this. Okay, so we got being is not, non-being is not. We're drawing some consequences. The first one is there can be no differences between things, and so there cannot be many things. So the appearance of many things is not the appearance of being, but it is just illusion. Okay. Now, so I give an argument. Maybe everybody understands the argument, but I'm just going to rehearse it. I already. What this should say is, for something to be different, it must not be what it is different from. But not being is not. There can be no such thing. Therefore, difference is not. Everything is one and the same. So, on the assumption that being is and non-being is not, that there are different things is necessarily an illusion. And to be honest, I had this great idea of why I wanted to have my arrows crossed out, but this morning, but I don't remember why I did that. So I'm not going to explain that until it occurs to me. But what?
Well, non-being can't apply to the first thing. Since
Oh yeah, I
non-being
think
is
yeah,
not-
you're right. So in order for there to be difference, non-being must somehow be. Right. And now
I would note here that universal in particular do require there be difference.
right. If anybody feels addressed or attacked by that remark, you're welcome to chirp up or provoked. All right, so first thing, there are no differences between things. And that is provocative. In order for there to be differences between things, not being must somehow be. And that seems like we're going into the land of universal contradiction. Okay, so in order for things to be different, without everything being said of them being contradictory, we need a more sophisticated, we need a more nuanced ontology and a nuanced understanding of things. That's something that Plato gives us, and that's something that Aristotle gives us. But we need to understand the problems that they're confronted with in saying anything at all philosophically. To be able to say anything about what is. We have to understand what the obstacles are. Otherwise, as Aristotle pointed out, we don't understand what the solutions are. All right. Next thing is, and this is important, no change. So a thought about being, namely that it is, if being is, there is no change. Bam. The argument that I'm just offering here, to change, something must not be what it will be, and something must not be what it was. But since not being is not, there can be no change. Change requires the being of non-being, just like difference does. All right, so our ontological thesis has consequence for things that can't be different. It has another consequence for the totality of the world. There can be no change. Change is illusion, difference is illusion. We go farther down. There can be no false statements, no falsity. A true statement says what is. A false statement says what is not. But non-being is not. Therefore, no statement can assert what is not. It is impossible to say what is false. Hence, every statement is true. Everybody follow that one? I can't see hands, so I'm just assuming you're all nodding. All right. So strangely enough, our thesis about being reflects back on that very thesis and condemns it, because on the basis of what this thesis says being is, and what is not, there is no such thing as a false statement, and whatever one says is true. And that means that the contrary of being is will also be true. Being is not. And now my theory is contradicted by its own consequences. It follows from it that being is not is true. but my theory was being is. And here we see how the thought of being is not just about something other than that thought, but it includes the implication of that thought in the object of that thought. And that's what the Greeks are wrestling with. That's what makes dialectics so fundamental to their work. I'm just going to pause and make sure that everybody's kind of on board and following what I say. I can't see you, so I can't see if your faces are looking sad or disgruntled. So can I just get a word from you guys? How you doing with this?
I'm really enjoying this thing, and it seems to me like Parmenides is a very non-dynamic view. You know, it's
Yeah, no change.
so there's no distinction and there's no dynamic.
Right.
It's almost like an anti-dualism. It's a monoism or
Oh
something.
yeah. Yes. I mean, I think, you know, I'm no Hindu scholar, but I think that there are Hindu theories of being that are very, very similar that were developed at approximately the same time, you know, where all appearances are Maya and appearances are include difference and change. And I don't know if Maya includes talking about Maya. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, we can see the this kind of radical monism. And we can understand why you might come to that radical monism, right? If you think that being is. It seems like such an innocent, it just like seems like it's such an innocent assumption. But what's magnificent about philosophy is the massiveness of the consequences.
Isn't Spinoza also another example of a monism?
That's good. I think so, but I mean, he's got a multiplicity of the one or the multiplicity of being, you know, the substance and its attributes and modes that are all excluded from Parmenides. That's why Deleuze loves Spinoza, because he thinks of him as not a philosopher of being, but as a philosopher of pure difference.
Richard has his hand up.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
So this is kind of a little bit of a pop culture reference, but I guess in regards to the no change. Like, is anyone familiar with Alan Moore and Watchmen?
Oh, I read that a long time ago. Yeah.
Or it was recently, like, in the script of their film released about like a little over a decade ago. It's like Dr. Manhattan. He says, like, a live body and a dead body contain the same number of particles. Structurally, there's no discernible difference.
Yeah, well, the structurally is a huge qualifier. Formally, there's a huge difference. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Richard. Did you want to follow that out a little bit?
No, I wasn't like using it to, you know, it's just sort of a funny pop thing that popped into my mind, you know.
Okay, awesome, thank you. All right, so this whole reflexivity thing, you know, hopefully, I mean, most of you are people who work with me a lot, and so you're very, very familiar with it, so it might be just utterly boring, but Parmenides, I think, clarifies what Aristotle is reacting against, and Parmenides clarifies partly what Plato is reacting against. And so we really don't understand a theory of forms, or we don't understand Aristotle's theory of change, or the theory of the relationship between substance and accident, without understanding it as a way of thinking the being of non-being, a way of getting past the dilemma, the impasse that the Parmenidean working out of the consequences of the idea that being is, what that poses for all knowledge, all comprehension, all saying anything true or false. All right. Finally, we get to no truth. Every statement refers to what is on the basis of the no falsity. Reference required that the statement not be what it refers to. And so statements cannot be about anything because they can't refer, because reference requires non-being. Right, so the conclusion, such a theory cannot be true and it cannot be false. That is, I think, what Plato and Aristotle ultimately recognized about the Parmenidean theory. It might be magnificent, it might be grand, it might be beautiful, it might be pure, but it's neither true nor false. And so therefore it's no theory at all. It is a magnificent work of art. It is a beautiful early form of opera, whatever you want to say. But it's not a theory. It's stated in words. It purports to be about things, but it cannot be about things as it stands. It is right. So it's sawed off the limb it stands on, and it's important that it's not because Parmenides has a certain theory of language that we can mess around with and then fix things. It's the thought of being itself that rebounds back into the theory and dissolves it from the inside. And this is what Plato and Aristotle are reacting to, and it's often Aristotle. And once we understand this, we can understand more about Aristotle's critique of his predecessors, that they didn't know how to avoid this trap. And so their theories fall prey to, the theories are corrupted by what they are supposed to be theories about.
You've
Okay,
got
so
some,
the rot
you've
is
got some
within.
hands, just FYI.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
Philip has his hand up, so does Richard Lamb.
Whoever's first, go first.
And Charles.
Oh, Charles
Charlie,
is here.
Charlie, I think you are before me.
Am I next? Okay. In reading this section in the Metaphysics, it seems to me that Aristotle put Heraclitus and Anaxagoras and Parmenides and he put them all kind of in the same category. He put them all together.
Mm-hmm.
That none of them could have an argument because, and I don't know if this is a correct understanding of it, none of them can have an argument about truth or falsity because none of them will admit, or none of them have a theory that there is not being, that not being is possible.
Right.
Is that correct?
I think that's very well stated. Right. And so, yeah, exactly. So once the nice thing about the Parmenides, we got that clear difference between being and non-being. And then what we do is we think that if being is that, all these consequences flow from it. And consequences that we cannot in good faith accept, because to accept them is to understand them as a theory about something. But we've already shown it can't be a theory about anything. It's a theory of being that excludes itself from being. And so we don't know what we're doing if we think we're accepting the theory, which isn't one at all. Sorry, there were multiple hands. Sorry, I really enjoy this stuff, and so I might talk too much. But anyway, whoever's next.
Philip.
Is this a argument about the possibility of predication at all?
Well, yeah, what I'm presenting is what I take to be Plato and Aristotle's critique of the Parmenidean monism that precisely, as you said, excludes the possibility of predication. Predication requires a difference between the predicate and the subject. If there is no difference, or if all difference is illusion, then every act of predicating is an illusion as well.
It's a curious phrase, being is. Like, what is the predication? It's like is.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. That is super interesting, and I've always wondered if Parmenides was sophisticated enough to know what he was doing, insofar as he states his theory without, without predicating something in the predicate. But I
Well,
think
it's the most fundamental
Right.
predication you can have.
Right. Well, yeah, if we assume that predication is predicating something of something, then that's not happening here. It is just, it's an absolute assertion. It is an absolute assertion because to deny it is to assert that non-being is not, or sorry, that being is not. And that is an immediate contradiction. And so it seems like if we're going to avoid that contradiction, we're back at being is, right?
Isn't there also the univocal or the one place use of being? Which it was like in the beginning of Irad Kimi's book or
Right.
Rudel's book, they went into that whole thing where they're just talking about the different ways of whether being is a two-place, takes an
Right.
object, or and there's some forms of that do not take an object, so you can just say is.
Right.
And so that might get out of the problem Philip pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
Been a while, I can't remember it though.
Yeah. I don't remember very much about it either, to be honest.
Charles
Although
Kahn.
it's very fascinating, and so whether Parmenides actually achieves a predication or whether he steps back from that precipice and says, okay, I can't predicate given what I'm thinking about being. So I'm just asserting what seems to be a tautology. Right. Nevertheless, whether that's an actual predication or not, certain things follow that I tried to sketch out in that previous page.
It was Charles Kahn and the one place. I'll paste something in chat.
Okay, well, no, I appreciate it. Thanks.
It was about the Greek one place being Charles Kahn, the Greek verb to be and the problem of being.
Yeah. I was looking at that when I was trying to look at trying to understand the difference between being and existence. Anyway, yeah, thanks. All right, so whatever being is, it can't just be. It's got to have there's got to be an internal complexity to being that
Michael, you got another hand up.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, before I go to the hand, can everybody see this page okay?
Mhm.
I'm screen sharing a page that says Heraclitus, Protagoras, and Anaxagoras.
Yeah, that's not
Didn't-
showing up very well.
It didn't change.
You're on the same
It
picture.
became smaller.
And
Could you
fuzzier.
Yeah,
click
like
this?
when you
Has
have
less
this,
being.
Yeah, when you have this view, it's like it's a lot fuzzier. Like it's like subsampling down or something.
Yeah, okay, so
And you're
no
showing
Kind
the-
of like
the old
it's kind of like
page.
the
Okay.
maps that get bigger and smaller.
Zoom in
And
on it,
yours
Michael.
went
Hit the
from
pl-
bigger to
pl-
smaller.
Hit the magnifying plus glass, Michael, make it bigger.
fucking hell, that.
But first he has to get the right page showing. That's number one.
Okay.
What page is showing right now?
The same one.
The same one from before.
God. Okay. Well, so I so apologize for this bullshit. Okay.
That's a different image. That's
There
good.
we are.
Yeah, so a couple more pluses. Okay, cool, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for your guidance, everybody. Tyler, I saw your hand up a brief moment when I was not screen sharing.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna note that illusion is also impossible for both Parmenides. So I mean, you can say, you know, everything else is an illusion after saying that being is and not being is not. But what it
Mhm.
is to be an illusion
Mhm.
is to not be something. So
Right.
so there's a
Yeah,
problem
no,
for that.
yeah, exactly. That's how Plato solves, the question of, what is an image? An image is not the thing it's an image of, right? And he gets into this in the Sophists, right? And so so he doesn't allow the contradiction that non-being or being is non-being, but he does introduce the concept of otherness. And so the image is other than what is represented in the image. And so that's one of the examples of how the early Greek thinkers are secreting non-being into being in such a way that we can make sense of having a theory at all. And how and what are the preconditions of a theory being true or false? Thinking a theory as true or false has definite consequences for what being can be. And that's what's so strange and so disturbing, but is so clearly shows up this interconnection, this connection between thought and being that is the subtext of this whole seminar. All right. Any other hands I can't see?
I see no other hands.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So we'll run through a couple of the other predecessors that also have ontologies that create problems for theory. Heraclitus, famous for saying everything changes. So we work this out. We think being as changing in all respects, and we're going to think that through. Okay, if everything is in flux, there's nothing that remains. There's nothing that remains through change, but everything that would remain is itself changing. If nothing remains, nothing changes. If everything changes, everything is what it is and is not what it is. Therefore, falsehood is impossible. Everything is what it is and not what it is. So everything, so it is everything, it is not. I'm just ripping through these. So why is falsehood impossible? Because everything is already everything. Everything is already changing, and in order to be changing, it needs to be other than it is, and that which is other needs to be other than it is, and that which is other needs to be other than it is, ad infinitum. So anything you say of anything is both the case and not the case. Sorry, I'm getting myself a little bit confused here. Is that anybody want to chime in and get the argument down? It was perfectly clear to me this morning, but I just I didn't write enough of it down, so I'm stumbling here.
Yeah, so it says here on the page, if nothing remains or nothing changes. So basically,
Right.
for everything to be changing, you have this problem. There has to be something stable that is a thing that undergoes change.
Right.
And so this pure change ends up negating the possibility of change.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything already is and is not everything it can possibly be.
Right.
Right. There's nothing for it to lack that it can become.
Right. So no matter what you say of it, it will be the case, right? Because everything is both what it is and what it is not. And so if I say of it what it is, I'm saying something true. If I'm saying of it what it's not, I'm saying something true. It's impossible to say something false. Thank you for helping me out of that one. Now you remember,
So in
Yeah, go ahead.
other words, Heraclitus actually contradicts himself.
indeed, not only does the thesis, everything changes, imply change is impossible, but it also implies that that such a theory is impossible because it excludes the possibility of falsehood. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it also excludes the possibility of there being something.
Indeed, yes. Do you want to explicate that a bit? That's good.
Well, if everything is changing and nothing can remain
Right.
of anything
Mm-hmm.
that we, in an illusory sense, think is there. If it's constantly changing, then you can never say something is.
Right.
It's never what it was at any moment, and
Right.
it's never what it's going to be at any
Mhm.
moment. It's always going to be in a state of change.
Right.
Therefore, you can't say that anything is.
Right. Excellent. So again, it's worth remarking, and I keep remarking it because I was so surprised to find it once we went through it, but how central Aristotle's notion of change is um, for everything he's doing here in the metaphysics. And it really is provides the pillar for understanding what he has to say about being, substance, and truth. So without the possibility of truth and falsity being different, there can be no change. And that's a provocative way of, or another way to put it is without something remaining, without something that doesn't change, there can be no change. And but especially the first formulation, I think, is the most radical. What we think about truth and falsity in their relation has implications for whether change is possible or not. It's something that's not just like we used to like to say, it's not just a thought. But you would in fact be contradicting yourself if you thought that there was no difference between truth and false and the same falsity, and at the same time thought that there was change. And it's this incredible interconnection between what we always separate off as the comings and goings, or the what's the expression, like the buzzing blooming confusion of the world, and then the cold and frigid icy structure of logic as being something completely different from that, just two different worlds. And here we're, Aristotle is thinking their necessary interrelation. It's not just an accidental or coincidental one that he's forcing, but all we have to do is think the implications of these theories of being, and we see the way in which any theory of being is also a theory of that theory. And so that theory gets sucked up into it and suffers the fate of anything in that of any of the consequences of that theory. I don't see hands, so if anybody wants to say something, or if there's Nothing, then I'll go on. All right. So get to Protagoras. Everything, sorry, I wrote things very quickly this morning. Everything is as it appears, right? Man is the measure of all things. Now, if everything is as it appears, then when something appears one way to somebody and the opposite way to another, then any such something is what it is and the opposite of what it is. Is that clear?
Yep.
So again, falsehood's impossible. If contrary or contradictory appearances are, the statements asserting this are true. Hence, every statement about anything will be true. So again, the Pythagorean theory, like the Heraclitean one, like the Parmenidean one, destroys discourse, makes theory impossible, and thus makes their own theories impossible. We might understand them, we might appreciate them, but we must also understand that what they imply includes their own impossibility. And so they self-annihilate. And I think this is, one of those things that it's just always good to be aware of, is whether a theory and what it's asserting annihilates itself. I stated at the very beginning, I think this is happening in most, if not all, naturalism. Right, because they are not trying to wrest they're not trying to wrest the possibility or save the or support the possibility of theory. They're trying to foster, they're trying to support the idea that science tells us what is. So they've already got a being and a way of knowing being, and all they're doing is just defending that, right? But that stuff that's just dogmatically given, right? There's this theory, and it's true or false, and it works sometimes and doesn't work other times, but it works often enough for us to get a lot of practical benefits from it. And so whatever that's about, that's all there is.
Yeah, so insofar as a naturalism is a mechanistic understanding of the world, mechanisms cannot have theories at all.
Right, and they're not all mechanistic, right? But they still don't, on their own account, it's impossible to understand how a theory. It's possible to understand how languages arise, but not how any of them can have true or false statements. And so we see, understanding the possibility of true and false statements is the key to any legitimate ontology that is not just dogmatically asserting that there's some realm and that's what is, and we've got this technique called modern science and we can get at it, and all we have to do is defend that, just hold on to that. No, because that is precisely what does not account for the possibility of true and false statements.
Yeah,
Did everybody appreciate how radical this is?
I think you can think of the concept of evidence, right? Someone can say, this seems like evidence to me. Another person can say, this seems like it's not evidence to me.
Right.
And then to get past that, you can't simply do more science. You have
Exactly.
to investigate what it means to be evidence.
What constitutes evidence? Exactly. Yeah, no, I like that. Thank you. I always thought evidence was one of the Achilles heels of the contemporary conception of rationality. Okay, before I move on, any hands? Okay, this is probably getting a little bit old, but I'm just going to run through it. And so with Anaxagoras, he gives us, each one of these theories is different. What's interesting is that they all lead to this problem that theory is impossible. So everything's a mixture of being and non-being. If everything's a mixture of being and non-being, then every affirmation, X is P, every predication, and or every positive predication, and every denial, X is not P, will be false. Right? Hence, falsehood is necessary. So if everything's a mixture of being and non-being, right? To say X is P is to say, is to affirm being to what, let me see, is to assert that what this statement says is the case. And then X is not P is asserting that this is the case. But since everything is both the case and not the case in Anaxagoras's model, right? Every affirmation will be false and every denial will be false. So falsehood is necessary. So it's necessary that every theoretical statement, every predication is false, including, of course, Anaxagoras's own. And then finally, change is impossible. If everything is mixture, everything is already what it will be and is already and is always what it was. So that's the short argument of change. And we've seen many times that change requires that something not be what it will be and no longer be what it was. So this is probably a familiar argument, but we're back at the theory of being annihilates truth as it annihilates change. And then the last one, let me see, I jotted it down. I'm not even sure if I understand it, but let me just read it through. Oh yeah, it's the infinite regress thing. If there is a middle between contraries, then since change is always a change from one opposite to another opposite, hot, cold, then between being something and coming to be something else, there will be an additional coming to be. And between being and passing away, there will be something in between, an earlier passing away. And between them, there will be an earlier passing away. And between them, there will be an earlier passing away. We fall right into Zeno's paradoxes. Since each contrary takes infinite time, change never happens. So two arguments against the possibility of change follow from Anaxagoras's general ontology. Everything is mixture of being and non-being.
Yeah, for Anaxagoras, it seems like he denies the opposite poles which are necessary for there to be a middle.
Yeah, do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, because everything is between being and not being. Anything that is somewhere between the two can never reach one or the other side, but if there's no one or the other side, there can't be the middle. So if you've got nothing is completely being, nothing is completely not being.
Right.
So the problem is that for something to be between those two states, something has to be.
Right. You have to assert being of it, yeah. But then, go ahead, Peter.
I think it's a little, I don't like the argument that just because if everything is a mixture of being and non-being doesn't mean it's between being and non-being. It's not completely the one, it's not completely the other, but that doesn't mean it's between. Well, just because something has a mixture, this would have to get to the whole. There seems to be something wrong about just asserting that it's between. The whole doesn't have to be this identical with the quality of its parts. If it has parts that are being and parts that are non-being, it still doesn't mean that the whole is in between being and non-being.
Right, but I think, as I understand it, Aristotle thinks that Anaxagoras thinks things are only in between.
Right,
The
mixture.
sense in which he uses
Well,
mixture
But,
in his
but
theory.
that means you can never parse out. There's the being side and there's the non-being side, because once you do that, the being side is and is not, or neither is nor is not, and the non-being side neither is or is not, and then you break those down in, and they're neither being nor non-being, right? And so you get this infinite diffusion, and there's no determinate middle.
but you can't say something about it. Doesn't mean, I mean, there's a difference in the ontological status of the thing and the what we can say about it, right?
Well, yeah, but the question is what that difference is. I mean, part of what I was trying to show is that there's a very, very specific relationship between those two, and that makes the theory impossible, or makes the statements impossible.
Right, it makes the statements impossible, but I think, I'm gonna have to go back and reread what Aristotle actually said about it. So I'll
Okay.
table it for right now, but
Okay, yeah, the Anaxagoras section was really, really tough, right? And I'm not saying I've got a firm grasp on it, but I did want to relate enough of it to the general theme here. Well, one thing we know is that Aristotle insists that on the distinction and the determinate distinction of truth and falsity. So and tries to point out the various consequences of not holding these two absolutely distinct.
I think I can possibly shed some light on the Anaxagoras section, because
Cool.
he says there's something for Aristotle. He says that for Anaxagoras, his theory is that there is something in the middle of contradictories. For when things are mixed, the mixture is neither good nor not good, so that there's nothing true to say. And I'm
you know what page you're on?
basically- I am on 1012 B.
I think that's gamma 7.
Yeah, my PDF is not
That's okay.
for
I'm
some
just
reason clear about it. But I
just
think
reading it today.
one of the things that's going on here is that Anaxagoras doesn't have it being good in some respects and bad in others, right? He has it mixed
Right.
in a more extreme way, which is to say that in all respects it is not good or bad. And it's the absence of with respect that makes change impossible. So like in order for something to be, quote unquote, between good and bad, right? What does it have to be? It has to be good in some respect and bad in others. But if it can't be good, if there is nothing that it is to be good determinately, it can't even be between good and bad.
I guess I'm just having a hard time squaring. So I found like in our Reeve, it's on page 67, the top, it says, which is 1012b25 or so, that that the theory of Anaxagoras, that everything is something in the middle of contradictories, makes everything false. So that characterization, something is in the middle of contradictories, doesn't necessarily mean that it's made up of both being and non-being, or however else that was.
But what's in between the contraries is neither being nor non-being. It's not something.
Right, yeah, that there's a problem with being in between the contradictories.
Right. Okay. Okay, cool.
I'm saying that phrasing doesn't line up with the original phrasing you had on your paper, I think, where you said that there's a mixture of being and non-being.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's in between being and non-being, or in between the contraries. It sounds like
Right.
there's a definite contrary and a different not
Right.
contrary.
But if we, yeah,
And I don't know how
Yeah.
how you make that jump. That's the thing's confusing me.
Well, I think those are kind of two different things. The makeup of something is a mixture of being and non-being. And then when he goes to talk about change, then that's when he talks about something being in the middle, that there be something from in the contradictories, that there's between the contradictories there are various stages, and that you really can't have them because they go on to infinity.
Well, if you take the as the contradictories being and not being themselves as being the two contradictories,
Yeah,
and if something has both of them, then it's neither the one nor the other completely.
right. And then it is just that.
One thing you can
So-
ask is it between being mixed and being not mixed?
No, it's mixed. But it seems to be between being and non-being because it has both aspects, theoretically. I think that's the objection. But anyway,
I mean, whatever this between is, it's what's neither being nor non-being, right? And so it's just like a big question mark of what that is and what does it mean to say that's between, right? So we find this between as a linguistic tool to talk about what Anaxagoras might be indicating by that which is neither being nor non-being, and that holding for everything. Right. So I personally don't put too much weight on the betweenness. Anything any more than there's a between the horse and the human. It's just a matter of speech for trying to speak about this that which is being indicated as neither being nor non-being.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
So I would hypothesize that the positing of a soul is a way to get around, is an attempt to get around this issue, this Protagoras issue that all is appearance. So soul gives you a way to maintain identity through difference.
Yeah.
So, and I am reframing the theory of the expulsion from Eden here.
Okay.
So if you
Levels
think,
upon levels.
well, if you think of, I mean, the origin of the Christian word for sin is that hamasha, right? Missing the mark.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of Christian theologians as taking Aristotle's sense of lack, which is another sense of sin. So when Adam and Eve are expelled from the paradise, the Christian word is, well, they're spared, they're now in sin. But another way to think about it is, no, they're in lack. But we know from Aristotle that only because of Aristotle's theory of lack can we have change.
Right.
So actually, the expulsion from Eden, and therefore Adam and Eve lack, that drives change, which drives history.
Ah. That's interesting.
Yeah. That's not how they taught me in Sunday school about what was going on in paradise.
No,
All right,
that's
it's
very
just
interesting.
that.
I appreciate you working out the thought and having it recorded so we can go back and
isn't that
hear
also
it.
in Dante about the lack of the lack of God being not in God's presence is the worst part of hell? Isn't that something like that?
Oh, yes, 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 thank you. Yes, right. And right, it's in a way, it's also, it's embedded within the good thief and the bad thief story on crucifixion.
What way?
Well, I'm so moved by this, but anyway, the bad thief reviles Christ. The good thief, all he asks for, he says, in Lord, when you're in heaven, please remember me with your master. right? That's all he asked for, just remember. And Christ says, when I am with my Father, you will be in the presence with us. You'll be in the presence with us, right? And it's also echoed in the story of the centurion, right? The centurion comes to Christ and says, you know, my child is ill. Can you please help him? And Christ turns to go with the centurion to the centurion's home. And the centurion grabs Christ's knee and said, Lord, I know if you simply say it will be done, it will be done. When I tell my men to do something, I know it's done. And then Christ turns to the disciples and say, hey, that's faith, right? That's faith. But it's that, but what I'm picking up on, and I'm very moved at it, is just that sense, it's the being in the presence of, right? The Christ is in the presence of the centurion. And then the good thief is in the presence of the Lord. I'm way off topic here, but okay, all right.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
The sinfulness is being distant from.
Right.
Thanks for
No, that's great. No, that raises so many. It's super interesting issues about the appropriation of Aristotle by early Christians, which really didn't actually begin until the mid 4th century. Interestingly enough, but yeah, and the whole question of evil, whether evil can be thought of as a privation or whether malice is a kind of positive substantive evil. I mean, it gets at whether there is such a thing as malice. Yeah, it gets to these issues and how the context within which Aristotle's integrated into Christian thought. Super fascinating. And it does add a little flesh to the bony skeleton of Aristotelian ontologic, I have to say.
I was just in Kansas City, as you guys know, and they have there are only 2 duplicate castings of Ghiberti's baptistry doors from Florence. So these stories were like they're immediately in my
I see. Okay.
body memory here. So there you go.
All right, parousia. Can everybody see this page, the Aristotle's alternative, or do I have a different page still up?
No, I can see it.
Okay. Everybody else?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Fine.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So this is not so, and I kind of promised a summary, and I wanted to see what I could do against this background of the impossibility of change and the impossibility of theory, or saying theory is just another locution for saying being, saying what being is. And we know the metaphysics. What we're doing is we're running through the different ways in which the question can be asked. What are the relevant things to be addressed in asking what is being, and the considerations that raise substance to be the primary thing that a theory of being is about. Right, so against that background, I wanted to kind of connect things that we've been talking about a lot, and in a series of, in a summary. So I'm just going to present it, and I appreciate anybody interrupting and commenting or objecting or inquiring into what I've written. Okay, so I appreciate it. Any hands before we launch in? Whoever the hand observer is, please say yay or nay.
See no hands.
Let's go.
No hands. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So we saw being is for Parmenides, and now we're beginning to see the import of Aristotle's expression, being is said in many ways. That's the first way to undercut the consequences of a Parmenidean conception of being. Now, some of this is just kind of summarizing. It's not argument. I'm just basically summarizing. So it might seem like I'm leaping a lot, and if I'm leaping in a way that isn't comprehensible, please yell and stop me. So each of these different ways is a category. Is what he calls a category, a way of addressing things, a fundamental way of addressing things. He basically talks, there's 10 categories, as you know, but he basically really only talks very much about 4 of them. Anybody know which 4, the main ones?
Well, I'm not sure I could recite them all, but
I just care about 4, not all 10.
yeah,
The ones that come up all the time.
right. Well, some things are said to be individually on their own, and that would be the substance.
Yeah.
Some things are said to be in others,
Mm.
and those would be predicates, or those would be, the term I use are accidents, but I don't know what,
Yeah, no, that's good.
or properties or
Right.
qualifications or something like that.
But I just have to remind you that properties is not one of the categories.
Right, yeah, right. But those are the only 2 I can.
Okay. Well, you're right about substance.
Of the 4.
Right, so-
That are in the very beginning of the metaphysics here, or in the beginning of the physics.
Well,
That's
what
where
I'm
they
looking
are.
at is the categories, and we know the first one is substance. But
Yeah.
he talks about a couple others. Does anybody remember what any of the others are? Just to
Well,
One of them
exercise your memory.
quality, quantity,
Yep.
place.
Right.
Let's see,
Yep.
habitus,
Yeah.
you know, the,
Yep.
size. That's the
Didn't you already
best
say
I can,
quantity? Yeah.
that's the best I can do without.
No, that's excellent. I just
Okay.
because some of them are somewhat archaic. The main ones are what you listed: substance, quantity, quality, and relation.
Yes, yeah,
Those are the 4 that come up all the time, right? And so that's like the short list. And interestingly, it's these. So these quantity, quality, relation are said of something and are in something, and that which they're said of and are in are substances. So there's clearly a hierarchy of dependence going on here. So so all categories are anchored in substance, and they cannot be without substance. They have no independent existence. And Aristotle's term for that is they are not separate. All categories are accidents to substance. So here I'm introducing the substance of the accident language to think about the relationship between quantity, quality, and relation to the substance. What does it mean to call something an accident? Question to the class.
Unessential to its being.
Sorry, I'm taking notes. I wasn't paying attention. What was the question?
Okay. No, if you're taking notes, I just got. What does it mean to call a property an accident?
That it's not essential? I mean,
Yes.
I don't know
What
if
else
that's-
what does that mean?
That the thing could be what it is is what it is, even though that property were lacked.
Yes. Yes.
So
That's it's a very Shakespearean way of putting it. Excellent. Is that
It's
hopefully that's what
contrasted with necessary, right? So
yeah.
if something is not necessary for something's being what it is, then it is accidental to it. And then we
Exactly.
use, in philosophy, we like saying the word qua.
Exactly. Exactly. We all felt like idiots at the beginning saying qua, but now it's indispensable. All right, substance is what is most eminently, but it is not a genus of all things. Right? All things are not a species of substance. And that is, however, how Aristotle understands Parmenides, and that is how the Stoics will try to develop an alternative theory of being. So we haven't talked about that, but I'm just placing an historical marker here. So to say that substance is what is most is not to say it's a genus. Okay, so let's not make that mistake. Okay, maybe it's worth asking. Does anybody know why it can't be a genus, or why being can't be a genus?
No.
Well, because if it's going to be part, I mean, you get an infinite regress roughly.
Yeah, yeah.
Because for at least for Aristotle, every genus, the species of that genus were along a dimension, were the contraries along a dimension or something like that. And but well, I lost the thread.
Well, I'll do my way, and if you regain the thread, then interrupt me. So in order for there to be a genus, it will need species. And then we're tempted to say, well, every being or every kind of being is a species of being. But the problem is what distinguishes a species from the genus itself? What is the difference? Well, it is the specific difference. So the species needs a specific difference that doesn't belong to the genus. All right, and so, but
This has the same structure as universal and particular again, doesn't it?
I don't know.
That we
that doesn't
talked
ring a
about
bell.
earlier with the difference.
Maybe, probably. I'm just
Never
not
mind.
seeing it right off the bat. But I'm just gonna make my point, and then I'm gonna please elaborate your thought. So the species must be made different from the genus and from other species by its difference, and that difference cannot belong to the genus. Now the genus is being, and so if the difference it belongs to the genus and precisely can't distinguish any species. And so you lose the species, and when you lose the species, you lose a genus, because there's no genus without species. And so this whole structure collapses when you try to make being a genus. Okay, I'm done. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the exact same structure as saying the particular has to be different from the universal, but neither the particular or the universal can account for the difference between them on their own. And you basically both need to be being, but neither can be being if both are.
Right. It
They're,
seems like your argument switched focus in the middle, but because we're talking about universal in particular and the difference, and then you went to the question of being, and then and made your point with reference to being and not with reference to universal in particular. But anyway, that's just maybe my confusion. Do you want to take another running start at it, or if I'm just misunderstanding you, just tell me.
well, wasn't the question about being not being a genus? And this is the same.
Exactly.
This is the same respect in which being can't be a universal.
Uh-huh.
Because any universal entails that it be different from the particulars
Right.
that are instantiations of the universal.
Right.
And in order for there to be a difference between the universal and the particular, right, they had to be different from each other, and they had to be different from being.
But only if the universal is being and not like, for instance, rational or animal. So it seems like what you're saying holds good precisely for the idea that when the idea that the universal is being, and then the particulars also are. So what distinguishes a particular from a universal, since it's all just one being? Is that it? Yeah, is that your point?
I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I'm going with here. So the
Okay, excellent, okay. Yeah, I was thinking of that this would obtain for any universal particular relationship. So the relationship between animal and bear, for instance, or and bear and human and deer, right? Or any other universal particular relationship. I couldn't quite wrap my mind around it in those more specific circumstances, but I can definitely see that it's the exact same argument when as the genus species one and the universal particular one, when the universal is thought of as being itself.
okay, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I should have specified that. But
All right. Is anybody completely lost about this whole, why being, at least on Aristotelian grounds, can't be a genus? So,
Michael, if you could go through that again, please, it would help me.
yeah, absolutely.
Feels quite important.
Yeah, I think so. And it's not something that actually we found in Aristotle. And to be honest, I don't know where he's actually arguing against the idea that when it actually says that being can't be a genus. I know it's in the book somewhere, but I can't find it. But so I'm just rehearsing what I recall about the argument and have encountered in different commentators, whatever. But the idea is that, okay, if being is the genus, then a genus, to be a genus, must be the genus of something, namely the species. But the problem is that the difference that distinguishes one species from another species and distinguishes the species from the genus cannot belong to that genus. So with Socrates is a human being, and the specific difference is of the human being is to be rational. Rationality is not an instance of the genus human being. It's not like we got Socrates over here and Xanthippe over there and rational over there. Reason isn't a species of animal. So it has to, so what differentiates each species within a genus has to be outside that genus. So since the specific difference of any species will in fact be, it belongs to the genus being and therefore cannot serve as a distinguishing mark. It doesn't distinguish anything. It just reiterates the genus. And so since the genus is now the totality and there's no species, it's not a genus anymore. We're dealing with some logically different creature. Being is a logically different creature than a genus. And it's important to understand why, and it's important to understand what Parmenides, the problems that Parmenides encounters, according to Aristotle, are rooted in the genetic way he thinks being. And it's also important for understanding basically understanding why Stoicism lost interest, or the antiquity lost interest in Stoicism from about the second century in the Common Era until the 1600s. Because of this.
My network lost its being for a bit there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I just want to, so I found that, the being is not a genus. That's in beta 3,
Oh, thank you.
but it is not possible that either the one or being should be a single genus of beings. For the differentia of each genus must be each both be and be one.
Oh, yes.
But it is impossible either for the species of the genus to be predicated of their own proper differentia, or for the genus to be predicated without its species. That's Metaphysics B3, 998, B21.
Thank you for finding that.
But so my summary of it would be like, if being were a genus, then the thing that makes it a genus would be outside of being and wouldn't have any being.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. No, that's another dimension that I didn't mention, and that's very good, right? If there's no higher genus than being that would distinguish this genus from anything else, and so it lacks any distinction, any limit, any determinacy whatsoever, right? Since there's nothing to determine it from above.
You mean being lacks determinacy?
Right, it's thought of as a genus. And that indeterminacy just gets passed on to the pseudo species and then the pseudo instances of those species.
So this leads me to, well, this I actually keep wanting to get back to that difference that Hegel has between Sein and Dasein, and wondering whether how that plays in,
Yeah.
or if it plays in here. Anyway, but that's probably for further research.
I'm sure it does, but I can't put my finger on it right now.
Well,
I mean, because I mean, what you're saying, and that's good. I mean, I remember Riddle saying it in one sentence that was just so magnificent. Of course, I don't have it at my fingertips, but he's asking his class, like, what is determinacy? This is not an easy question, right? What is how does one think determinacy? How does one say what's determinacy? What determinacy is, right? To be something specific, and he's like, well, it's being insofar as it's not being. And so, yeah, determinacy is precisely the unity of being and non-being, and that's where Hegel makes that very, very explicit, and we can definitely use that as an assistance to understanding Aristotle's insistence on. Yeah,
you can immediately see that Parmenides would not like that determinacy is the union of being and non-being.
Yes,
that wouldn't really fly well with Parmenides.
No. Yeah, but but with Hegel, it's being going over into non-being, or nothing, and nothing going over into non-being. It's the act, it's the activity, it's the act, right? It's an agaia. It's an agaia that allows the unity of non-being and being, just like it's dunamis that allows something to potentially have contrary predicates, even though it will actually won't have them all, but only that which it is that won't contradict itself. So dunamis and agaia, just they're the crowning jewel of Aristotelianism, and when we can see how they work in Hegel as well. Being and nothing are not the same qua content, but it's their going over into one another, that their mutual sublation, that actuality of them, that is determinacy.
Didn't Nietzsche always also worry about Übergehen?
I guess that's what Übermenschen do when they walk.
Well, it's what clowns do on the tightrope, I thought. But anyway.
Uh-huh. Oh, really? I didn't know that. Anyway, all right. Philip, would I say gel at all about the genus thing?
Thank you. Yes. That's the turn out of Parmenides right there.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's already, so to speak, it's the harbinger is this being is said in many ways. Okay, so now we're away from this monolithic conception of being, which is our ordinary. I still would argue this our ordinary conception of being. And we must become philosophers once we recognize that our ordinary conception of being is shit.
So if we are modern and we think that thinking is representation, we can't be having this whole conversation.
Well, we'd only appear to be, but it would be an illusion. Isn't that why not naturalists also like to talk? You know, so it's virtual, but it's not real. I don't know. All right, so let me try to run through some of
No,
this.
by that I mean, it's what's
Oh.
critical here are these distinctions.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Anybody else want to piggyback on that?
Well, I was just going to say that I think both Heidegger and Rudel make the point that the concept is also like that, and that the concept Überhaupt is not a concept alongside other concepts.
Right.
It has that same problem.
Exactly.
Yes.
I didn't realize that Heidegger made that, but it makes sense. Have you
When he
been
made it,
making?
he says it in the introduction. That's about as far as I've gotten.
Okay. I got to go back to, yeah, but everything you say about it is so fascinating. I was like, I didn't pick up on that when I read Being in Time before. So now that I've got a lot more Aristotle under my belt, I think that book is going to just speak volumes. All right. So
And Eckhart.
anyway, Eckhart should be philosophy 101 for everybody. Yeah.
That's the way I personally view Being in Time. Is it's a conversation between Eckhart and Aristotle, moderated by Heidegger.
Yeah. I can see that. Fascinating. Well, hopefully the group lasts long enough for us to get to Heidegger one of these days. All right. Now, so I'm rehearsing the kind of stuff that we've already talked about, and so it should all be more or less familiar, although, yeah, maybe not everything, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to present everything that we've talked about at length in one interconnected way so that you see perhaps better how everything we've read over the past year, how it's not just a bunch of inscrutable fragments, but has been mutually reinforcing each other in the set of ideas that I'm trying to set out here. All right, substance is what is most eminently, but is not a genus of all things. What makes substance substance is not any of the other categories. What makes substance substance will be the cause of substance. That brings us to the causes. There are 4 causes: form, matter, end, and motor cause. Why are there 4? This comes from the comprehension of natural beings in the physics, things whose nature must be included in any account of their change. So there's no going back to something else exclusively, some prior cause that accounts for the nature of the change of any natural being. You're going to have to give account of that being itself being the way it is in order to understand the kind of change it undergoes. Thinking change, we think matter, form, end, and mover. What something changing becomes, we think, but to think change, we think what that changing thing becomes, its end. We think what arrives at the end, the matter. We think the end of change, what the end of change is, its form, what makes it this thing, what makes it determinate, and what brings the change about, the motor cause. So, complete list of the relevant causes for thinking change. Natural beings have the peculiarity that the form, the end, and the motor are identical. Whereas artificial beings, like the builder of the statue, the form, end, and motor are distinct. I'm not going to talk about any more of that. So if that's not clear, or if that's something you want to dig into, now's the time to do it. All right, we can go back to it if something occurs to you. So,
Sorry, Michael.
No, please.
The section we're in the phenomenology is that piece about natural beings, form, end, and mode are identical.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right, okay. Okay, yes.
Right.
And
Okay.
humans are natural beings, among other things.
Yes.
So unless I mean, this puzzle, right, you raised, why is Hegel spending, or the commentators, why is Hegel spending so much time on this if no commentator thinks it needs to be discussed? It's because he's got to establish this piece around natural beings.
Right. Right. And it will, as
And he uses the language of, I mean, 19th century biology, but it's form, end, and mode are identical.
yes. I agree with that. I mean, that's why, our reading of the physics and our projecting the physics back into the metaphysics has been so reminiscent of Hegel, especially the reason chapter itself, which is dealing with how to rationally account for living things.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, from within living things.
Yes. Essential. All right. To think change, we minimally require what ceases to be, the lack, what comes into being, the form it acquires, and what becomes it, matter. So when the unmusical person becomes musical, they lose their unmusicality and they gain musicality, and that which persists in this change is what he refers to as the matter, that which has gone from unmusicality to musicality. That's the matter.
Is the matter that different than the underlying subject?
Well, underlying subject is a functional term, and so it depends on different contexts. But in change, the underlying subject is the matter. Yeah, it's that which undergoes the change.
So I remember Philip had sent out that article a long time ago about I forget, Mark somebody or other. It's a very short one on, and then his take was that sort of the thing that makes something what it is the set of potentialities,
All
not
right.
any of its actual current form, but the set of potentialities.
Yes,
That's sort of
yes,
its identity in some sense as a substance.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, so what it becomes is, but that would say that then it's not really what it becomes would be the matter. Then that would be because it's already had that pile of potentials. I mean, if I become sunburnt, it's because I had the potential to become sunburnt.
Right.
But I don't. So in that sense, the potentials, it's just the potential has been actualized. It's me with a different set of actualities, as it were.
Mhm. Yeah, he also says, change, the lack is a cause of change, but it's a coincidental cause. And we talked about the coincidental causes that are retroactively made causes in virtue of something's happening. And so the lack was only there when it was lost. It was only, right, because you can't become sunburned if you're already sunburned. So you need to be not sunburned in order to become sunburned. But that lack is not a palpable presence in you, right? But it is that which made possible your becoming sunburned. And so it can't be independent of you, but it's a coincidental cause. It's transformed into a cause as that without which you would not have been able to become sunburned once you're sunburned. I can't see anybody, so if you're nodding heads, that's good. If you're disagreeing with me, let me know.
Well, I'm not, I have a question about if matter is always the substratum or substrate of change.
Yeah.
What about learning and spiritual developments and things of that sort?
Right. Right. But so that which is that which what do I want to say? Let's say it's a soul that learns, and the soul is immaterial. It's the form of a living body, but it's going to be the soul that that loses something, namely non-spirituality, and gains something, gains a new form, spirituality. So it's the soul, which is not itself a physical thing, is going to be the matter of that change.
Okay, okay.
So that's what I mean by it's a functional concept. It depends on what's changing and what remains
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Cool. All right.
So I'm back on Hegel. Can we divert here for a moment?
Yes, please.
So that the section on reason, on observing, so the pattern of thinking and the pattern of living are the same. They are both a comprehension of the whole from within the whole.
Yeah.
So the mistake Parmenides makes is, to use my language, right? There's no stance to comprehend being outside of being, unless you view the logos.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
But the logos
Exactly.
can't be. The logos is not independent of the being. It can't be, which is what
Exactly.
the whole modern project is
Yes.
stand outside, and we see that now in like Ray Kurzweil's singularity or Zuckerberg's meta. Right? It's completely deeply. It correctly grasps the necessity for an independent stance, but it doesn't understand that independent stance can only be taken from within the whole.
Yes.
And the way to get separation within the whole is through knowledge as distinction. That's it. That's the only way you can cut.
Exactly. Right? Because thought being in the whole, and thought being of the whole, brings the whole into thought. And so thought and the whole are not separate in a way that would allow for an external observation, but are interpenetrated such that one only grasps the whole by articulating the whole that's in thought. And that's not describing anything, that's working out distinctions.
Oh, thank you, Michael. What a great
Yeah,
Christmas gift. Oh my God.
Oh, thank you.
So moving, so moved. Yes. It's like hope. It's like victory. It's like there's hope.
Yeah, oh, definitely. That's what I felt too when I came to understand this. Yeah, it's 6. So for the sake of this recording, I am going to go through the rest of this, which is just this page plus like one other sentence. But it's 6 o'clock and maybe you're done and you want to chime out. Please don't feel like you're violating any code or anything. If it's time for you to go, please go. And thank you so much for being part of this this year with me. And but I'm going to run through these so that they're part of the recording. And if anybody wants to refer back to them, they'll be easily available. Is that cool?
In addition to the recording, can these JPEGs be made available as a share?
Oh yeah, if they're helpful.
Great.
Yeah,
There's
awesome.
a lot here. Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, Richard. I appreciate it. All right. Okay, so this is again a little bit of recapitulation. Change requires what becomes and what it becomes. We must think what is the end product, what is lost in the end product, and what stays the same from beginning to end. Now, I realize I'm simplifying the account of change a little bit, but it's only in order to make it integrated into this summary. All change is from opposite to opposite, for instance, hot to cold. But what has no opposites cannot change. Substances are defined as having no opposites. There is no opposite to this Socrates or this horse. The substance doesn't change when the thing made of matter and form changes. That's not a good formulation because they're not actually made of matter and form. The matter and form are the principles of anything changing. So I just want to add that correction. It might not make any difference, but I don't want to mislead you. Okay, and that leads to questions. And those are the questions that we're going to hit brutally in the central books of the metaphysics, which are not coincidentally called the substance books. We've been dancing around substance for a long time. We're going to plunge into it in books Zeta, Eta, and Theta. And we will come to an understanding of substance and the kind of unity that substance is when we've come to a deeper understanding of activity and capacity, or actuality and potentiality.
Are you promising that we will come to an understanding of substance?
Yes, because I will pummel you with, at least you'll come to my understanding, which is which hopefully is good enough. If matter is what stays the same and substance doesn't change, if matter is what stays the same through change and substance doesn't change, then it would seem that matter is substance. Is matter substance? Seems almost self-evident. And yet, sweetness itself is never bitter. Heat is never cold, but rather something is hot and then becomes cold. Wine is sweet and becomes bitter. Forms like sweetness and hotness do not change. Is then form substance? Okay, so that leads to, that's just kind of my simple way of showing why the question that Aristotle is going to deal with, whether matter or form is preeminently substance, arises because that there's a sense in which neither of them change. Right? Matter state remains the same through change. Forms themselves don't change. But it's the combination of matter and form that changes. But matter doesn't change, form doesn't change. Hence, they seem like the preeminent candidates for what substance is, to get a better understanding of substance. In other words, if we want to study substance, are we better off studying matter, or are we better off studying form? All right, now 22, seems like I might have jumped a little bit here. Hopefully I'll grasp why 22 comes next. I wanted to get at what I think is maybe the most important result, at least the most eye-opening result for me of the past year. And that's something that we touched on all the way through, but I didn't really grasp its significance until later. And that's what we've been calling, the asymmetry of account transfers. So what is that? Hopefully that becomes clear in what I say here. So we have the proposition Socrates is human, and we break down human as rational and animal. We also have the sentence that also uses is and therefore implies being. Socrates is pale, and pale is the genus of pale is color, just as the genus of human is rational, with the specific difference being the genus of human is animal, with the specific difference being rational. And now each of these sentences gives us an is, but strangely is doesn't function in the same way in these two. Although Socrates is rational and an animal, he's not a color. So not all accounts transfer to a substance. This compels us to acknowledge general properties that transfer their nature, like the animal and the rational, to a substance, and express what it is. These are called, and these are essential. Essence, Latin, which is a translation of based on esse, which is to be, which is a translation of enai in Greek, which is the verb to be, and ousia is a participle of that. Ousia is always the term that Aristotle uses when he refers to substance. Some have translated that as beinghood or beingness, the character of being. But anyway, Right. So at this point, because of the account transfers, we are, and the peculiar nature of the structure of the account transfers, we are compelled to distinguish between essential properties and we are also, and accidental ones. We are compelled to acknowledge general properties that do not transfer their, I should say, genus to a substance. Pale is a color, but no substance is color if it is pale or any other color. So what it is to be pale is to be a color. But when Socrates is pale, he's not a color. These are accidental. So, right. And I wanted to point out, I pointed out a million times, I apologize for repeating myself, but this relationship between Socrates, his being human, and his being pale, the fact that the genus of human animal applies unequivocally, there's no equivocation to Socrates, but the color doesn't apply to, it doesn't transfer to Socrates. And what I want to point out is this is not a linguistic fact. You cannot find this in studying grammar. You cannot find this by studying the linguistic habits of the Greek upper class or males in Greek society. It is not an empirically given thing, and yet we recognize its necessity in these simple sentences. So we're not studying history, we're not studying society, we're not studying language. This transcends all of them and forms a basis for these other instances that we want to explain this away with, right? It's a basis. It's a basis of history. It's a basis of language. It's a basis of society. How we categorize things is absolutely fundamental, and it's not a matter. It's not just an act of will. How things are categorizable, as we've seen here, it's not an act of will that makes animality attributable to Socrates, but not color. This is something deeper that the Greeks call logos, and I have harped on that. We have to think of where logic, language, and being. Think of them as a Venn diagram, and think about that place where they intersect. All three of them intersect. That place, that's logos, and this is, I think, the clearest example I've ever seen of what is meant by logos. It's not reducible to anything empirical, and it's the basis for any empirical, for all of our empirical claims. All right, I just have a little tiny bit more. One last page here. Thank you for your patience. It's not even a page. Everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay. And that, so now we're at substances and accidents and change. And if there were only so I just dashed these off right before the meeting, so I'm not sure if they're how well thought out, but they did strike me as important in a kind of a unifying thread way. If there were only substances, there would be no change, since substances have no opposites, and change is change between opposites. If there were only accidents, there would not even be accidents, since there would be nothing that remains the same and nothing would change. There would be only random volatility without regularity or predictability. Everything would be changing into everything for no reason. And in order for there to be accidents, that they must be anchored to something that is not opposed to them. And finally, change depends on the difference of truth and falsity. In a world where truth and falsity are not distinguishable, there can be no change. All right. I think that last one is the most provocative, and but I think I've given enough background to comprehend it, and that's the kind of thing, you know. That's the just. I'm going to finish off with this. You know, philosophers have results, and I think people get focused on the results, and then those results aren't comprehended in terms of what problems they solve, and when we consider these results as just their opinion, and we say, well, I'm of a different opinion, right? And so I don't have to take this philosopher seriously because I've got a different opinion. We haven't examined whether it solves the problem of how there can be a theory of anything at all. My little opinion that I counterpose to the result of Aristotle doesn't comprehend that that it is offered as a solution to how it's possible for us to say what being is. And if my counter opinion is itself of perhaps a Parmenidean or a Heraclitean or an Anaxagorean kind that destroys itself in its very utterance, it just doesn't have a lot of weight, you know, to be counterposed to Aristotle. And so today I really wanted to present this ontological, this meontological, the Greek word for non-being or nothing is meon, right? This meontological background that forms the matrix out of which Plato and Aristotle arise as indicating the problems that their theories of reality or their theories of substance, of being, are actually struggling with. And so they're struggling with Parmenides. They're not struggling with, you know, to give accurate empirical descriptions of things bouncing around in front of their noses. All right, that concludes my summary. And it's on tape now. So I'm going to let you guys, you're probably completely gobsmacked and exhausted. But if you do have any, if this provoked any thought in you that you want to try to articulate before I stop recording, I'll let the recording go here for a little bit longer.
Well, I have to say that, Michael, it's just really, Aristotle is so arduous. But the way I think of it in my simple heuristic is that he's unpacking what we do when we say anything.
Right. Oh,
Unpacking,
nice.
and so it's like, well, of course someone's going to bother to do that finally. You know what I mean? And it was but of course it's a Herculean exercise.
Yep.
And I'm noticing how it's affecting all these other knowledge sets that I study.
Interesting.
And like, for example, when we were going through Parmenides today, I noticed that again and again in historical thinking and anthropology and all and economics and in political science, you have a very static point of view going on very often. And one of the things I really get from Aristotle is everything is dynamic. Being is dynamic. And when you see these theories like social Darwinism, for example, in history and anthropology applied, you know, the reductionism and the static way of thinking it seems just a very common error to not see the dynamic beingness of everything. And they want to reduce it down to predictable, safe, static beings, and then they lose the whole every time when they do it.
Right.
And then what they say doesn't really have any, doesn't say anything anymore. And so it's just shocking to me how, like, just having Aristotle in the air in the background of my mind when I'm looking at other things just so vastly changes what I see and what I do. So
that's so beautiful, and that's so Heideggerian. I learned that years ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Heidegger says in one of his lectures, we do not say what we see, we see what we say. Right? Or if we think of saying as, you know, what we understand, right? it's not that vision gives us things to understand, but we see as much as we understand, and the more we understand the kind of discriminations we have, the kind of questions that we've learned are pertinent, structure or open up. Oh, and structure sounds like it closing down, but it really opens up the text to, and it opens it in its question begging, fractured, fragmented, inadequate essence. It happens to me all the time when I read social science. Yeah, and anyway, yeah, because once these questions, once you understand the provenance of these questions, where they come from and what makes them urgent, right? And then you see people just like sloppily, just completely ignoring all this shit and just constructing their theories, and we'll postulate this and that, and then we got, yeah, I understand that's important for science, and it's good for science and has practical value, but it's not philosophy, it's not being, and it's not thinking.
Now, for example, in economics,
It's calculating.
so in economics, they'll say, okay, this theory holds, all else being equal, all
Yeah.
else not changing.
Ceteris paribus.
And then, but that situation never obtains in the world ever,
Right.
ever. And
Right.
so they continuously mess it up.
Mhm.
It's funny, like, I told you, like George Soros studied under Popper at the London School of Economics.
Yeah.
His simple theory of reflexivity is that, no actor in the system doesn't, the cause goes back and forth.
Right.
But the static way that economics sees these models, all else being equal, they state that, but they're not
Right.
rigorous enough to realize, but that situation never obtains. And that's all that Soros is telling them, is that situation never obtains, cause bounces back and forth, and that's so it's just shocking how many times this distinction is missed. But anyone that understood Aristotle would get it right away.
Yeah.
I'd like to respond to Bo's train of
Yeah.
thought there, but maybe outside the recording, it's gonna.
Oh, okay. Shall we stop recording?
If that's your wish, we can stop recording.
Yeah.
No, you haven't stopped recording yet. It'll say recording stopped. Let's see.
Right. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yes.